On Father's Day, my daughter Isabel declared I was a forgetful burden who needed to be managed. Her gift? A memory box designed to prove I was incompetent. Also, she could get her hands on my retirement. But she forgot what 45 years on the factory floor taught me. When a machine gives one last roar, it brings the whole damn thing crashing down. Have you ever been given a gift that just felt wrong? Not that you didn't like it, but that it was fundamentally incorrect. Something that made your stomach clench, even though the wrapping was perfect, the bow was tied just right, and the person giving it to you was smiling. That feeling, that cold dread when you realize the gift isn't for you, but is actually a weapon aimed directly at you. Hello, my friends. My name is Braden Lindsay. Thank you for being here to listen, truly. After so many months of silence, just having someone listen feels like a precious thing. If you're out there, maybe hit that like button and let me know what city you're listening from. Ohio, Florida, somewhere far away. I'd really like to know how far this old man's story from Ohio can travel, and if maybe, just maybe, there's someone else out there who feels the same way I do. This Father's Day was different. It was the first one without Helen. This house in Ohio, the one where we'd built everything for 40 years, was filled with nothing but the echo of silence. The creak of the floorboards under my feet sounded so damn lonely. Our plan, Helen's and mine, had been simple. Sell this house, take the equity we'd built up, about $380,000, and move down to Florida. A small condo, somewhere with enough sun to forget the cold winters and the ache in my joints. So when the doorbell rang, I let myself hope. It was Isabel, my daughter, holding a box wrapped in a deep blue paper, the exact color of Helen's eyes. She smiled, a weary-looking thing, and I thought, maybe today won't be so bad. She spoke in a near whisper, as if sharing some sacred secret. I made this for you, Dad. A box to keep all the best memories of Mom. The box was heavier than I expected, a strange, dense weight in my hands. Inside, it was lined with black velvet, like a case for expensive jewelry. Isabel carefully lifted out a sterling silver picture frame. Look at this one, she said, her voice full of a strained enthusiasm. Your trip to the Grand Canyon. Mom just loved this picture. I took the frame, the cold of the metal seeping into my fingers. I stared at the photograph. It was me, all right, wearing the plaid shirt Helen bought me for my birthday one year. And it was Helen, her hair blowing in the wind, a genuine, beautiful smile on her face. But the background, that vast, majestic canyon. We'd never been to the Grand Canyon. Our biggest trip, the one we saved for and talked about for years, was to Niagara Falls for our 25th anniversary. I can still feel the cool mist on my face. I remember how Helen couldn't stop laughing, a pure, joyful sound that the water couldn't drown out. A chill traced its way down my spine, but I said nothing. Maybe I was the one misremembering. The next thing Isabel pulled from the velvet depths was a leather-bound journal, the kind Helen always used for her recipes. It's Mom's diary, Dad, Isabel whispered. I found it when I was clearing out her closet. The handwriting was Helen's, unmistakable. My hand trembled slightly as I opened it to a page marked with a silk ribbon. The familiar slanted script read, May. Worried about Braden, he forgot our anniversary again. A fist closed around my lungs. Our anniversary. Not once in 40 years had I forgotten. It was our day. We'd go to the little Italian place down the street, order 2 plates of lasagna and a bottle of red wine, just like on our first date. How could she have written that? I looked up at my daughter, searching her face for an answer. She was watching me, her eyes wide with a look of perfectly performed concern. There were other things in the box, odd little trinkets, An old ticket stub from a movie I'd never heard of, Sunset Boulevard. A small enamel hummingbird pin that I'd certainly never seen Helen wear. She liked simple things, a string of pearls, the locket I gave her. For each object, my daughter had a story, a narrative woven so skillfully, it sounded terrifyingly plausible. Mom used to go to the movies by herself sometimes, don't you remember, Dad? That pin was a gift from her best friend. I felt like a stranger watching a film about someone else's life, someone else's wife. My mind, a mind that had once managed hundreds of factory workers, that could recall part numbers and machine maintenance schedules stretching back for years, now felt blank, chaotic. I was standing in my own living room, surrounded by my own furniture, and I felt utterly lost. "Don't you worry, Dad," Isabel said then, her hand coming to rest on my shoulder. The touch was light, but it felt like a lead weight. "It happens to everyone. A little forgetfulness. I read online it's perfectly normal at your age. Look, why don't we do this? Selling the house, it's complicated. So much paperwork. You just let me handle all of it. You just need to rest, take care of yourself." The offer sounded so sweet, so reasonable. A dutiful daughter, wanting to lift the burden from her aging father. So why, deep in my gut, did the alarm bell I knew from 45 years on the factory floor start screaming? I knew that sound. It was the sound a machine makes right before it fails. The whine of a bearing that's out of alignment. The signal of a hairline fracture that's about to split wide open. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and my own daughter was gently, lovingly trying to nudge me over. After Isabel left, leaving behind a heavy silence and the expensive scent of her perfume, I sat alone with that poisonous gift box. On the coffee table, I placed the photograph from the Grand Canyon next to the real one from Niagara Falls. 2 worlds, one real, one fake. I touched Helen's face in both pictures, trying to find some truth in her smile. I tried to dredge up the memories, to search the archives of my mind like a warehouse foreman looking for a lost part. But doubt, once it's planted by someone you love, it grows faster than weeds. Was it true? Had I gotten it all wrong? Was my own mind betraying me? That fear, a fear far worse than loneliness, began to settle over me. It was a fog, cold and thick, and it was starting to choke the life out of everything I thought I knew. A few days later, Isabel returned. This time she wasn't carrying a gift box, but a thin, gleaming tablet computer. "Dad, I've been thinking a lot," she said, her tone grave and serious, like a doctor about to deliver a diagnosis. "It's just not safe for you to be managing your banking and bills by yourself anymore. The internet is full of scams targeting seniors. What if you forget a password or click on the wrong link?" She started talking about the cloud, 2-factor authentication, end-to-end encryption. The words were a foreign language to me, a man who'd spent his life with the tangible reality of machinery, grease, and numbers written in a physical ledger. "This technology is so complicated now. It's better if you just let me handle the online banking for you. It's completely secure. I'll back everything up to the cloud. You'll never lose another piece of paper again." She was painting a picture of a world that was safe and orderly, but all I could feel was myself being pushed further and further to the edge of it. I've always taken pride in managing my own affairs. Every bill paid on time, every penny of our savings accounted for in a hardcover blue ledger. That book, its edges were soft and frayed from years of use, but every number inside it represented my sweat, my responsibility. It was proof of a life spent providing. But now, listening to my daughter's concerned voice, watching her earnest face, my confidence was shaken. The fog of doubt from that gift box still lingered. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was just too old for this new world. I walked into my study and took out the blue ledger where Helen and I kept all our passwords. It was a simple act, just retrieving a book from a drawer. but it felt like I was surrendering the keys to my entire life. She sat at my desk, her fingers flying across the glowing screen with a quiet, efficient clicking sound. And with each click, I knew another piece of my tangible financial world was being uploaded to a place I couldn't see, couldn't touch, and couldn't control. "All done, Dad," Isabel chirped after about an hour. "From now on, all the statements and bills will be sent directly to my email. I'll take care of everything. You won't have to worry about any of this paperwork anymore." She smiled, gathering the stacks of utility bills and bank statements from my desk and stuffing them into a tote bag. For a brief second, I felt a wave of relief. No more numbers to crunch, no more due dates to remember. But it was immediately followed by a profound, hollowing emptiness. My desk, which had always been my command center, was now stark and bare. A man, my father used to say, is defined by his ability to provide, by his responsibilities. Now, the physical evidence of my responsibilities was gone, swallowed by something called the cloud. I felt invisible. That week, I didn't get my usual quarterly call from my life insurance agent, my old friend Jim. We'd always have a quick chat, more about fishing than policies. Finding it odd, I picked up the phone and called him myself. The voice on the other end wasn't Jim's. It was a young, impersonal female voice. "Mr. Lindsay, our records indicate that all future correspondence is to be handled via the email of your authorized representative, Ms. Isabel Lindsay. This is a requirement for security and account consistency." I froze. Authorized representative? I never authorized anyone. I tried to explain, to argue, but the young woman just repeated the line like a machine. I hung up the phone. The invisible walls of this cage I was in felt like they were slowly closing in. I was no longer the owner of my own information. Isabel had given me a supplementary credit card. "Just for emergencies, Dad." I had no intention of using it. It sat deep in my wallet, tucked behind my favorite photo of Helen. But one evening, while looking for a scrap of paper, a small receipt from a recent grocery run fell out. At the very bottom, in tiny print I would normally ignore, was a line. "Previous balance includes a transaction of $127.50 at Reptile Palace." Reptile Palace. The name was absurd. I'd never been to a place like that in my life. I sat there for a long moment staring at the words. This wasn't a hazy memory. This was a number, a name, a fact printed in black and white. A cold, sharp sliver of certainty began to cut through the fog in my head. When I asked Isabel about the charge the next time she visited, I made sure to keep my voice casual. She glanced at the receipt, then gave a little laugh, waving it off. "Oh, that! I was buying a birthday present for one of my son's friends. The kid is obsessed with bearded dragons. You know how kids are these days? They're into the strangest things." The explanation was quick. It was smooth. But it didn't fit. My grandson, her son, is 6 years old. His friends are all the same age. Who buys a $127 gift for a 6-year-old's birthday party at a reptile specialty store? The factory foreman part of my brain, the part that looks for inconsistencies, kicked into gear. I didn't argue. I just nodded. But inside my head, I logged the information. It was a faulty part, a product that didn't meet spec. And I knew from a lifetime of experience that when you find one faulty part, it's only a matter of time before the entire assembly line starts to break down. Technology is supposed to make our lives easier, but sometimes it just makes you feel like you're losing control. Have you ever hesitated to give your passwords or financial information to someone else, even family? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd really like to hear them. Every Saturday morning at 8 o'clock, Bill would call. Bill was my best friend. We'd worked the line together at the plant for 30 years, served in Vietnam together before that. That call was a ritual, a cornerstone of my week. We never said much of anything important. We'd check in, complain about the weather or the politicians, and make loose plans to go fishing at the end of the month. It was a simple thing, but it was real. That Saturday morning, I sat by the phone, my coffee growing cold in my hands, and I waited. The slow, heavy tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to swallow every other sound in the house. That weekly call, I realized as the silence stretched on, was my last lifeline to the world outside, the world of men like me, the world of things that were still solid and true. My coffee went completely cold. 8 o'clock came and went. Then 8:15. The phone remained silent. It was a heavy, unnatural quiet, the kind that precedes a storm. This wasn't like Bill. At exactly 8:20, the silence was shattered by the shrill ring of the telephone. A breath of relief escaped my lips. I reached for the receiver, a smile already forming on my face. But Isabel, who had been clattering around in the kitchen, was a step faster. "Hello?" she answered, her voice sweet as honey. I watched as she shot a quick, almost imperceptible glance in my direction before turning away, lowering her voice. "Oh, hello, Uncle Bill. Yes, it's me, Isabel." I sat frozen in my chair, my hand still outstretched. A frown tightened my brow. Why was she answering my phone, especially Bill's call? A knot of irritation tightened in my stomach. It felt like someone had just walked into my yard without asking. This was my territory, my life. I strained to hear what she was saying, but her voice was a conspiratorial murmur, the words lost to the distance between us. I pushed myself up from my chair and took a few steps closer, just enough to bring her words into focus. Her voice was now dripping with a syrupy, fake sympathy. "Oh, Uncle Bill, Dad's just so tired lately. He's been getting very confused. His memory isn't what it used to be. Last week he got lost at the supermarket. It gave us all such a scare. I really think it's best if he just stays home and rests. But don't you worry, I'm taking good care of him." The air left my lungs. Got lost? I had never gotten lost in my life. I could walk the route from my front door to that supermarket blindfolded. Every word she spoke was another hammer blow, driving another invisible nail into the wall she was building between me and my only friend. She was painting a portrait of me as a helpless, doddering old fool, and she was doing it with my best friend as her audience. Isabel hung up the phone and turned to me, her face a perfect mask of concern. "That was Bill, Dad. He wanted to take you fishing again. I told him you weren't feeling well. You need your rest. It's too windy out on the lake right now. It wouldn't be good for your heart." She poured me a glass of water from the pitcher on the counter and pressed it into my hand. "Don't you worry about a thing. I've got it all under control." She was treating me like a child. In one swift, clean motion, she had stripped me of my right to make my own decisions, my right to even speak to my own friends, and she'd wrapped the whole ugly act in the pretty paper of her concern. Her manipulation was so subtle, so perfectly executed. If I argued, if I protested, I would become exactly what she'd described to Bill, a confused, ungrateful old man. All I could do was stand there in silence, taking a sip of the water that tasted like ash in my mouth. For the rest of the day, I paced the length of the house like a caged animal. I wanted to call Bill back. I wanted to yell into the phone, "I'm fine, Bill, my daughter is lying." But each time I reached for the receiver, I hesitated. What if Bill had believed her? What if he now pictured me as a man who couldn't be trusted, a man whose mind was failing? Isabel hadn't just planted a seed of doubt in my mind. She was now planting it in the minds of everyone I knew. A hot wave of shame washed over me. I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over the numbers, then set it back down in its cradle. The feeling of being silenced, of being made into an unreliable narrator in your own life story, was a pain sharper than loneliness. It felt like being buried alive behind walls that your own child had built. In the days that followed, the phone hardly rang at all. I imagined Isabel had made other calls. Perhaps she had told the whole world that Braden Lindsay was now just a shadow of his former self. I'd sit in the living room, staring out the front window at the street. The world outside looked the same. The mailman making his rounds, kids riding their bikes. But I felt like I was in a prison with no bars but no escape. Isabel was the warden, and the silence was the walls. She had succeeded in cutting off my lines of communication, in making herself the sole gatekeeper of my reality. I was completely and utterly isolated. And in that isolation, the fear and the confusion had all the room they needed to grow. It was my grandson's 6th birthday. Isabel said she was having a small party at her house, just family. It had been weeks since I'd left my own property, weeks since I'd seen anyone other than her. For the occasion, I took my time. I shaved carefully, using the old badger brush my father had given me, and put on my best shirt, a crisp blue Oxford that Helen had always liked. As I looked in the mirror, I felt a flicker of the old Braden returning, a man who showed up, a man who was present. When I arrived, the sound of laughter and music was a welcome warmth against the chill that had settled in my bones. My grandson ran to me, wrapping his arms around my legs in a fierce hug. For a moment, a single, beautiful moment, I forgot about the poisonous gift box, the intercepted phone calls, the creeping fog of doubt. I was just a grandfather at his grandson's birthday party. I settled into a comfortable armchair in the corner of the living room, a quiet observer, just smiling at the happy chaos. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged. Later, as the adults were talking, my grandson came over, proudly holding up a new toy. It was a big, brightly colored plastic fish. "Look, Grandpa, look how big!" he exclaimed, and the other kids giggled. The sight of it, so simple and joyful, unlocked something in my mind. A memory surfaced, not hazy or uncertain, but crisp and vivid, as clear as the Ohio sky on a perfect summer day. "Well, look at that," I began, my voice swelling with a pride I hadn't felt in months. "That reminds me of the fishing trip we took, out on Lake Erie, remember? You were only 4 years old. We were on Bill's boat, and you and we caught a largemouth bass almost as big as you were then. You screamed so loud with excitement." I could see it all perfectly in my mind's eye, the sunlight glinting off the water, the triumphant gap-toothed grin on that little boy's face. It was one of my most precious memories, a golden thread in the tapestry of my life. A memory I knew was real. I was lost in the warmth of that recollection when a voice, as soft as a whisper and as sharp as a razor, cut through the air. "Oh, Dad," Isabel said. Her hand came to rest on my shoulder, a gesture of feigned comfort, but her eyes were already scanning the room, broadcasting a message of weary sympathy to the others. "I think you're getting confused again." The chatter in the room didn't just die down. It was extinguished. Every pair of eyes turned to me. I looked at my daughter, my mind struggling to catch up. What was she doing? Here? In front of everyone? "You're mixing up your trips, Dad," she continued, her voice now dripping with a condescending pity that was far more cruel than any shout. "That trip to the lake, that wasn't for fishing." My heart began to pound against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I could feel the blood draining from my face. Isabel smiled patiently at our audience, the picture of a devoted caregiver managing a difficult patient. "In Mom's diary," she announced, her voice loud and clear enough for everyone to hear. "She wrote all about that weekend. The whole family went to Cedar Point, the amusement park. She wrote about how much she nodded toward my grandson, loved the roller coasters. You must just be tired, Dad. It's easy to get memories jumbled up." She spoke of that fraudulent journal as if it were the gospel truth. In an instant, She had transformed my golden memory into a symptom of my senility. Across the room, I saw a few people nod understandingly. Others looked away, unable to meet my eyes, embarrassed for me. Her performance was flawless. She wasn't just my daughter. She was my accuser, my judge, and the expert witness all rolled into one. I sat there, pinned to the armchair by the weight of their collective gaze. I wanted to stand up, to shout that the diary was a lie, that my memory was the truth. But what could I say? My protest would only be seen as more evidence of my confusion. I looked around the room. I saw pity in my sister-in-law's eyes. I saw awkward discomfort on my son-in-law's face. I saw my grandson looking at me, his expression bewildered. In that moment, I ceased to be Braden Lindsay, the competent factory foreman, the loving husband, the proud grandfather. I had been recast in a role I never auditioned for, the forgetful old man. My words had no weight, my memories had no value. With just a few gentle sentences, Isabel had publicly demolished my credibility. On the drive home, Isabel didn't say a word. The silence in the car was a physical presence, heavier and more suffocating than the silence in my empty house. My story of the fishing trip, a memory that had once glittered like gold, now felt sullied, contaminated. I didn't know what to believe anymore. I started to question everything, turning my own mind into an interrogation room. Were all my memories this fragile? Were they all just the misfirings of a decaying brain? That night, I lay awake for hours, staring into the darkness, and I was forced to admit a truth that was more terrifying than anything Isabel had done. I was beginning to play the part she had written for me. I was beginning to believe my daughter's lie. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, unannounced. She wasn't carrying her usual smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes. In its place was a look of solemn gravity, a carefully constructed mask of concern. She placed a thick manila folder on the coffee table between us. It landed with a soft, definitive thud. "Dad, sit down," she said, her voice an octave lower than usual. "There's something we need to talk about, seriously." The air in the room, already heavy with unspoken things, suddenly became dense and charged. I knew, with a certainty that chilled my blood, that this wasn't a casual visit. This was a meeting. And I had the distinct feeling I was about to be fired from the job of running my own life. I sat down on the sofa opposite her, my hands resting on my knees, and waited for the axe to fall. "I spoke with a friend of mine. He's a lawyer," Isabel began, her voice calm and measured. She had rehearsed this. "I told him about your situation, about the forgetfulness, and he said that we need to take steps to protect you." She nudged the thick folder across the table toward me. "This," she said, tapping the cover, "is a power of attorney for health care and for your finances. He said it's a very standard procedure. It's just so that if a time comes when you can't make your own decisions, I can step in and make them for you." She used words like, "just in case," "to keep you safe," "a precaution." Every phrase was carefully chosen to transform an act of appropriation into an act of protection. She wasn't just my daughter anymore. She was a corporate raider, presenting a hostile takeover as a sensible merger, and she was trying to legalize her role as my warden. I picked up the stack of papers. It was heavy in my hands, weighted with the gravity of what it represented. I squinted at the pages, a dense forest of tiny black text. It was a language I didn't speak. Legal jargon designed to confuse and intimidate. Durable power of attorney. Fiduciary duty. Successor trustee. My mind, which was built to understand blueprints and machine specifications, was lost in this labyrinth of words. I felt that familiar creeping sense of inadequacy that Isabel had been so carefully cultivating for weeks. I felt ignorant, outdated. My reading glasses resting on my nose suddenly felt powerless, unable to penetrate this fortress of legalese. The entire document was designed to overwhelm, to discourage, to force a surrender. "It's just paperwork, Dad," Isabel urged, sensing my hesitation. Her voice was gentle, but there was a hard edge of impatience beneath it. She reached over, took the folder from my hands, and flipped directly to the last page, a page with 2 empty lines waiting expectantly. "See, you just sign here and here. It's all standard." The lawyer looked over everything. She held out a pen to me. It wasn't a cheap ballpoint. It was a heavy, expensive-looking fountain pen. "If Mom were here," she said, her voice dropping into a soft, reverent tone, "she would want us to do this. She would want to know you were being taken care of in the best possible way." There it was again. Helen. My Helen. She was weaponizing my love for my wife, turning 40 years of devotion into a tool to be used against me. She knew it was my greatest weakness, the one place I was utterly defenseless. The invisible pressure in the room became immense, pressing down on my shoulders, heavier than any physical weight I had ever lifted. My hand trembled as I reached out and took the pen. It felt cold and alien in my fingers. I leaned forward, positioning the nib over the first line on the page. But as the tip of the pen hovered just above the paper, something happened. A series of images, sharp and unwelcome, flashed through my mind like a faulty projector. The 12750 saw us on discharge from the Reptile Palace. Bill's familiar Saturday morning call, intercepted and silenced. The pity in the eyes of my family at my grandson's birthday party as I was publicly declared incompetent. The foreman in my head, the man who had spent a lifetime spotting the smallest defect, the slightest inconsistency, suddenly roared to life. A red warning light flashed behind my eyes. The gut instinct of a man who had signed thousands of purchase orders, who had inspected tens of thousands of machine parts, screamed at me. This is a trap. This is the kill switch. This is the signature that ends everything. I couldn't do it, but I didn't confront her. I wasn't strong enough for that, not yet. Instead, a different kind of instinct took over, a survivor's instinct. I used the very cage she had built for me as my defense. I slowly, deliberately, placed the pen down on the table beside the papers. I leaned back and rubbed my eyes. "I can't find my reading glasses," I said, my voice sounding authentically tired and weary. "The new ones I just got. My eyes are just so strained today, Dad. The words are all blurring together." I let out a long, slow sigh. "Let's leave it for tomorrow. I'll look at it again when my head is clearer." It was the first lie I had ever told my daughter. It was a small, simple lie, but it felt like the most significant act of my life. It was my first act of rebellion. I had taken the weakness she had assigned to me and turned it into a shield. I could see a flicker of frustration in her eyes, quickly suppressed, but she was trapped by her own narrative. She couldn't very well force a confused old man to sign a legal document he claimed he couldn't properly see. She had lost the battle for the signature, and I had won the only thing that mattered. I had bought myself time. Sometimes, the most important decisions of our lives are hidden in documents we don't fully understand. Have you ever felt pressured to sign something important before you had the time to really read it? Share your experience in the comments. It's by sharing these stories that we all stay a little safer. The letter arrived on a bleak, overcast morning. It was lost in the usual shuffle of grocery store flyers and junk mail, but its color made it impossible to miss. A single, blood-red envelope, the color of emergencies, of final warnings. It stood out with a sense of screaming urgency. My heart skipped a beat. With the old letter opener that Helen had always kept on the hall table, I slid it open. Inside, the words were printed in a stark, bold, all-caps font that seemed to leap off the page at me. Final notice of service disconnection. It was from the electric company. They were informing me that if the outstanding balance was not paid in full within 48 hours, they would be cutting off my power. Cutting off my power. For 50 years, from the day I started my first real job to the day I retired, I had never, not once, been late on a bill. It was more than just a financial habit. It was a code I lived by. It was a measure of a man. Responsibility. Providing. Keeping the lights on. It was a fundamental point of pride, the bedrock of the life Helen and I had built. And now, that bedrock was crumbling beneath my feet. A wave of panic washed over me, hot and sickening. But it was immediately followed by a memory so clear and solid it felt like I could reach out and touch it. 2 weeks ago, I was sitting at the kitchen table. Isabel was sitting across from me. I had just withdrawn $300 in cash from my pension account. I could still feel the crisp new texture of the bills in my hand. I remembered counting them twice, just as I always did, before sliding the stack across the table to Isabel. "This is for the electric, the water, and the gas for the month," I told her. "Make sure you pay them on time, please." It wasn't a hazy recollection she could twist or reshape. It was a physical transaction. Cold, hard cash, an undeniable act. The contrast between that crystal-clear memory and the red letter in my hand was like a jolt of electricity, powerful enough to burn away the fog of self-doubt that had clouded my mind for months. My hand didn't shake as I picked up the phone and dialed her number. When she answered, I didn't yell. My voice, when I spoke, was eerily calm, the kind of calm that comes after the storm has passed and all that's left is the wreckage. "Isabel," I said, "I just received a final notice from the electric company. They're threatening to shut off the power." I paused, letting the silence hang in the air between us. I was giving her a chance, one last chance to tell the truth, to admit a mistake. For a split second, a foolish, fatherly part of me hoped there was a rational explanation, a simple mix-up. A part of me still wanted to believe in the daughter I had raised. Her voice on the other end of the line was frantic for a moment, a flicker of genuine panic before the practiced calm washed back over it. "Oh my God, Dad, I am so sorry. I paid that online, I swear I did. Their system must be messed up. You know how these big utility companies are. They're a nightmare to deal with." The excuse came pouring out, smooth and well-rehearsed. "Don't you worry about it. I'll call them right now and get it sorted out. See? This is exactly why I said I should handle these things. It's just too complicated." She was doing it again, blaming the invisible enemy of technology, reinforcing her narrative that the world was too complex and I was too old to navigate it. But this time, the lie was different. This time, it was thin and brittle, and the truth shone through it like a harsh, ugly light. As she finished her excuse, something happened inside my head. It wasn't loud. It was a quiet, clean little sound. A click. It was the sound of the final tumbler falling into place in a combination lock. The Grand Canyon photograph, the forged diary, the Reptile Palace receipt, Bill's silenced phone call, the public humiliation at the birthday party. And now this, the red letter. They weren't isolated incidents. They were a chain, a carefully calculated campaign. The fog vanished. The self-doubt evaporated. And all that remained was a single, cold, hard fact, as solid and unyielding as steel. My daughter was systematically robbing me. She wasn't just after my money. She was after my reality, my dignity, my very existence. I didn't argue with her. There was no point. The time for words was over. "All right," was all I said. "You take care of it." Then I hung up the phone. I didn't sit back down. I didn't pace. I stood up and walked with a purpose I hadn't felt in a year, straight through the kitchen and out into the garage, a space I hadn't set foot in since Helen passed. A thin layer of dust coated everything, a shroud of neglect. I walked past the lawnmower and the old fishing gear, directly to my workbench at the far end. With the sleeve of my shirt, I wiped the dust from the lid of my old metal toolbox. Click. The latches sprang open. The smell of machine oil and cold steel hit me. The familiar perfume of order, of control, of the man I used to be. I reached inside and took out a fresh, unopened spiral notebook and a simple ballpoint pen. I carried them back to the workbench, sat down on my old stool, and opened the notebook to the first clean, white page. The war had just begun. The garage was no longer a dusty mausoleum of memories. It had become my command center. I spent my days out there, surrounded by the ghosts of old projects, the scent of oil and sawdust, a familiar comfort. This was my world, a world of logic and order, of things that fit together with mechanical precision. On the old workbench, cleared of its clutter, I taped up a large sheet of plotter paper from my factory days. With a red marker, I began to draw a map of my daughter's deceit. Each event was a point on the chart. The memory box. Reptile Palace, $127.50. Bill's call. Power of attorney. I connected them with straight, angry lines. It was no longer a random series of painful moments. It was a schematic, a blueprint for a heist, my heist. And like any good foreman, I knew what was missing. I had the design, but I lacked the materials. I needed physical proof, the kind of hard evidence you can hold in your hand. And I knew exactly where the inventory was stored, in Isabel's old bedroom. Getting access was the first operational challenge. I couldn't just walk in there. The pretense of my helplessness had to be maintained. I took a deep breath, picked up the phone, and summoned the character she had created for me. "Isabel," I said, letting a weary sigh bleed into my voice. "I'm starting to clean out the house, getting it ready for when the realtor comes to look. Your old room, it's still full of your things from high school. Do you want to come over and see if there's anything you want to keep? Or should I just start packing it all into boxes for storage?" My voice was flat, the voice of a tired old man tackling a chore he didn't want. I could hear her exhale on the other end of the line, a faint puff of impatience. "Oh, Dad, just box it all up. I'm so busy right now, I don't have time to go through old junk. I'll look at it later if I get a chance." It was perfect. She still saw me as harmless, a doddering old man puttering around the house. She had just handed me a search warrant for the heart of her territory. Her old room was like a foreign country inside my home, where the rest of the house was Helen and me, clean, ordered, and modest. This room was pure Isabel. Designer clothes were strewn over chairs, empty high-end shopping bags lay crumpled in a corner, and stacks of glossy fashion magazines teetered on the nightstand. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, and something else, something I couldn't quite name. It smelled like desperation. I began my search systematically, the way I would conduct a quality control inspection on an assembly line. I started with the closet, then the dresser drawers, then under the bed. What I found painted a bleak picture. Piles of overdue credit card statements, dunning letters from department stores with names I could barely pronounce. It was the paper trail of a life lived far beyond its means, a life built on a foundation of debt. A pang of sadness, a father's grief for his child's failures, pricked at my heart. But I pushed it down. The cold resolve of the foreman took over. This wasn't the time to be a father. This was the time to be an auditor, tucked away in the deepest corner of the closet, hidden beneath a pile of old sweaters, was a shoebox. The brand was one of those Italian names that cost more than my first car. It felt unusually heavy. My heart started a low, heavy drumming against my ribs. This was it. This is where people hide things they don't want found. I didn't open it there, in her territory. I carried it out of the room, through the quiet house, and back to the garage, back to my command center. I placed the box on the workbench directly under the harsh, unforgiving light of my utility lamp. I sat on my stool, took a slow, steadying breath to calm the tremor in my hands, and then, carefully, I lifted the lid. Inside, there were no shoes. It was filled to the brim with papers, bank statements, contracts, letters, all in Isabel's name. My hands, which had held steady for decades while welding steel and calibrating machinery, were shaking now. I carefully laid the documents out one by one under the bright light, arranging them like pieces of a puzzle. Statements from banks I'd never heard of, revealing staggering levels of debt, credit card bills with interest rates that were nothing short of criminal. And then I found it. The final, horrifying piece of the puzzle. A loan application package for her failed interior design business. On the section for asset declaration, she had listed my house, this house, at a market value of $380,000, and next to it, a handwritten note, guaranteed future inheritance. Clipped to the application was a document that made the air leave my lungs. It was a poorly forged copy of a will, with a clumsy imitation of my signature scrawled at the bottom. There was no more fog, no more doubt, no more questioning my own mind. There was only the cold, stark reality illuminated by the garage light. She hadn't just been lying and stealing from me in the present. She had been planning this for a long time. She had been selling off my future while I was still living in it. The anger that rose in me wasn't a hot flash of rage. It was a glacier, slow, cold, and immensely powerful. I walked back into the house, went to the hall closet, and took out the old 35mm camera I'd used to take Isabel's first baby pictures. I returned to the garage. With the meticulous precision of a crime scene photographer, I began to document everything. I laid each page flat on the workbench and captured it on film. The sound of the mechanical shutter was loud in the silence of the garage. Click. A credit card statement. Click. A letter from a collection agency. Click. The forged will. After days spent holed up in the garage, a fortress of my own making, I knew my solitary war had reached its limits. Isabel had her lawyer friend, a shadowy figure who gave her actions a veneer of legitimacy. I needed a soldier in my own corner, but who could I trust? The world outside my front door felt like a minefield, complex and treacherous. And the shame of it all, the shame of admitting that I, Braden Lindsay, a man who had provided for his family his entire life, was being systematically dismantled by his own daughter. It was a bitter pill to swallow. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my silence was the very thing Isabel was counting on. Silence was a slow death. I pulled out the yellow pages, a relic I hadn't touched in years. My finger, calloused from a lifetime of work, traced down the columns of fine print, past plumbers and electricians, and stopped on a listing. Elder law attorney. The phrase used to make my skin crawl as if it were a brand for the feeble. Now, it looked like a life raft. Making that call was harder than facing down a broken-down, $500,000 stamping press with a deadline looming. It was an admission, a vocal confession of my own powerlessness. My voice was a dry rasp when I spoke to the receptionist. "My name is Braden Lindsay," I managed to get out. I think I need to talk to someone about financial abuse." Just saying the words out loud made them terrifyingly real. There was a pause on the other end of the line, not of judgment, but of practiced calm. Then a kind, efficient voice replied, "Of course, Mr. Lindsay. Would you be able to come into the office tomorrow at 10 a.m. to meet with Ms. Anya Sharma?" I agreed. When I hung up the phone, a strange and contradictory feeling washed over me. A wave of pure terror, immediately followed by a ripple of profound relief. The first step, the hardest step, had been taken. Anya Sharma was not what I had pictured. I had expected someone older, perhaps a bit stuffy. She was young, sharp, and her eyes held no pity, only an intense, focused intelligence. Her office was immaculate, everything in its proper place. It reminded me of my own workbench when a project was going well. I sat down in the leather chair opposite her large mahogany desk and placed my worn folder on its polished surface. It felt small and insignificant in that room. I started my story, my voice trembling at first. I told her about the Father's Day box, the Grand Canyon photograph that was a lie, the intercepted phone calls, and the final, damning red envelope from the power company. I expected her to be shocked, to gasp or show some sign of disbelief. She did none of that. She simply nodded, her expression unchanging, as if she had heard this exact story 100 times before in 100 different voices. And in that moment, for the first time, a sliver of light broke through my isolation. I wasn't the only one. "Do you have any proof of these things, Mr. Lindsay?" she asked calmly when I had finished, her voice even and professional. This was my moment. I opened my folder. I didn't present the documents apologetically. I laid them out on her desk with the precision of a man presenting evidence at a safety hearing. The bank statements showing the debt, the credit card bills with their ruinous interest rates, the loan application. And finally, I slid the photograph of the forged will across the polished wood toward her. I watched her eyes, trained to find the devil in the details, move swiftly across each document. I saw a flicker of something in her expression, not surprise, but confirmation. She picked up the photo of the will, holding it under her desk lamp. "This is a felony, Mr. Lindsay," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of the law. "A very serious one. Your daughter wasn't just planning to take your money, she was planning to erase you." Her words were like a drink of cold, clean water after wandering in the desert for months. I wasn't crazy. It wasn't my memory. It was real. Ms. Sharma leaned forward, her professional kindness replaced by the sharp-edged resolve of a general outlining a battle plan. "Here is what we are going to do," she began, her tone leaving no room for doubt. "First, we file for an emergency temporary restraining order. That will prevent her from accessing your accounts or attempting to sell the house. Second, we contact these banks and credit card companies with this evidence of fraud. Third, and this is the most difficult part, Braden, we report this to the police. This is a criminal matter." She laid out the steps. 1, 2, 3. It was a language I understood. Logic, process, a problem with a solution. This was no longer a swirling mess of pain and confusion. It was a job to be done. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt the satisfying click of control returning to my grasp. As I got up to leave, Ms. Sharma put a hand on my arm, a gesture that was both professional and deeply human. "Braden," she said, using my first name for the first time. "You did the right thing by coming here. The hardest part is admitting you need help. You're not a burden, and you are not alone in this fight." Her words gave me a strength I didn't know I had left. I walked out of that orderly, quiet office and back into the sunlight, but I was a different man than the one who had walked in an hour earlier. I was no longer a victim, lost in a fog. I was a client with a plan, a man with a good tool in his hand, ready to get to work. I had an ally, and that, I was beginning to understand, made all the difference in the world. After my meeting with Ms. Sharma, the house was no longer a prison. It had become a fortress. The silence that had once been a suffocating blanket of loneliness now felt different. It was the quiet of a soldier in a forward observation post, waiting for the signal to advance. I spent the next few days in the garage, methodically cleaning and organizing my tools. There was a deep, therapeutic comfort in it. The familiar scent of oil and steel cleared my head. I'd wipe down a wrench, feeling its solid weight in my hand, and hang it on the pegboard. With each tool returned to its proper place, a chaotic thought in my mind seemed to click back into alignment. I was restoring order, not just to my workbench, but to myself. I knew a storm was coming, I knew Isabel wouldn't surrender her campaign without a fight, but for the first time, I felt ready. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard sense of purpose. I was no longer a confused, frightened old man. I was a man with a plan, a man with a mission, and a man with the law on his side. I would sit in my armchair in the living room, the one Helen always said had the best view of the street, and I would just wait. And then it came. Not as a storm, but with a quiet, almost surreal formality. A county sheriff's patrol car. It turned onto our street and cruised slowly to a stop directly in front of Isabel's house, right across from mine. Ms. Sharma had told me to expect it, that a process server, accompanied by a deputy, would deliver the restraining order. But knowing it was coming and seeing it happen were two very different things. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. A uniformed deputy, tall and broad-shouldered, stepped out of the car. He held a sheaf of papers in his hand. He walked up the concrete path to my daughter's front door, his steps measured and heavy. He knocked. 3 sharp, distinct raps. The sound wasn't just loud, it was official. It carried across the street and through my window. That sound didn't just echo in the quiet neighborhood. It resonated deep inside my chest. It was the sound of justice knocking. It was the sound of my private, silent war becoming a public, legally recognized fact. It took less than 5 minutes. The phone rang, shattering the quiet. It wasn't the gentle ring I was used to. It was a shrill, frantic shriek, as if the device itself were in a panic. I knew who it was. I took a slow, deep breath, letting it out just as deliberately, and picked up the receiver. The voice that came through the line was not the sweet, concerned voice of my daughter. It was a raw, guttural scream, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage and disbelief. "What did you do?" she howled, the sound so distorted with fury I could barely recognize it. "The police were at my house. They handed me a piece of paper that says I can't come near you, I can't touch the accounts. Are you insane?" And just like that, the carefully constructed mask of the loving, dutiful daughter disintegrated. The monster that had been hiding underneath was finally, fully revealed. I said nothing. I just held the phone to my ear and let her scream, letting the poison drain out. When the initial explosion of rage subsided, she immediately fell back on her old tactics, her voice now trembling with a theatrical sob of indignation. "You have no idea what you're doing," she cried. "That woman, that lawyer, she's using you. She's just after your money. Can't you see that? I was trying to protect you, and you go and trust a complete stranger over your own family. You are so ungrateful. You don't remember anything, Dad. You're confused. She's been putting these ideas in your head." She was making one last, desperate attempt to pull me back into that fog of self-doubt, to convince me that I was a pawn, a mentally incompetent man being manipulated by an outside force. But the words had lost their power. They were no longer weapons that could wound me. They were just noise, the desperate, grinding sound of a broken machine. I waited until she had exhausted her last argument, until all that was left was her ragged breathing on the other end of the line. Then I spoke. My voice was calm and clear. It was a voice I hadn't heard from myself in a very long time. It was the voice of the man I used to be. "Isabel," I said simply. "Anything you have to say, you can say to my lawyer. Her name is Anya Sharma. You have her number in the papers you're holding." That was it. One sentence. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to defend myself. I now had someone to do that for me. That sentence was a declaration. It was a boundary line drawn in stone. It was the formal, final transfer of power. From now on, she would no longer be dealing with a confused old man. She would be dealing with the law. I hung up the phone before she could say another word. The silence rushed back in. but it was a new kind of silence. It was peaceful. The first wave of the storm had passed, and I was still standing. I felt drained, utterly exhausted, but also lighter than I had in years. I walked into the garage and stood before the large paper schematic on the wall. I picked up my red marker, and with a firm, decisive stroke, I drew a line through the box labeled Direct Confrontation. The first step was complete. I looked down at my hands. They weren't shaking anymore. They were the steady hands of a mechanic, of a foreman, of a man who was putting his own life back in order. The war was far from over, but for the first time, I knew with absolute certainty that I could win. Drawing a line with a family member is one of the hardest things a person can do. Have you ever had to say no to someone you love in order to protect yourself? Share your story if you feel comfortable. It might just give someone else the strength to do the same. I thought, after the restraining order, that there would be a line Isabel wouldn't cross. I thought there would be a firewall of basic decency. I was wrong. She didn't come back herself. She didn't call. She sent a weapon far more cruel, far more effective than any lawyer or lie. A few days after the storm of her phone call, my doorbell rang. When I opened the door, it wasn't Isabel. It was my grandson, Leo, all of 6 years old, standing alone on my doorstep clutching a worn teddy bear. His eyes were wide with a confusion that bordered on fear. My heart seized in my chest, a sudden, painful clench. What had she done? Had she used her own son as a human shield, a Trojan horse? I quickly pulled him inside, my eyes scanning the street. Her car was gone. She had just left him there, like a package on the porch. A delivery with more destructive power than the Father's Day memory box could ever have. I fixed him a glass of milk and sat him on the sofa with a plate of cookies, his little legs dangling high above the floor. He took a small, hesitant bite. "Grandpa," he said, his voice a tiny whisper, "Mommy's been crying." I sat down beside him, the old springs of the sofa groaning under my weight. "She says you don't love her anymore." Every word was a needle, expertly dipped in poison and pushed directly into my heart. I knew with a sickening certainty that these were not the words of a 6-year-old boy. They were Isabel's words, scripted and rehearsed, placed in the mouth of an angel. "She says you're mad at her because she doesn't have a lot of money," he continued, looking up at me, his eyes clear and searching. Are you going to make us leave our house, Grandpa?" He was asking me, in the only way he knew how, if I was the monster his mother had described. I looked at my grandson, this beautiful, innocent boy. I saw Helen in the curve of his cheek, in the way his hair fell across his forehead. The love I felt for him, a pure, unconditional force that was one of the few true things left in my life, was being twisted by his own mother into a weapon against me. It was her most brilliant, most diabolical move yet. She knew. She knew I could stand up to lawyers and legal papers. She knew I could see through the lies and the manipulations. But how could I stand up to the pain in my own grandson's eyes? She was putting me in an impossible position, a perfect trap with no escape. I could surrender, drop the fight, and let her take everything just to stop the hurt she was inflicting on him. Or I could continue to fight for my life and my home, and in doing so, become the villain in the story she was telling the one person whose love I treasured most. My love for my grandson had been turned into a noose around my own neck, and for a moment I almost let it choke me. The fight just drained out of me. The pain of seeing him so lost and sad was a heavier blow than any of her lies. I thought about the phone on the kitchen wall. I could just pick it up, call Anya Sharma, and tell her it was over. I could tell her to drop everything. What was it all worth, really? The money, the house, even the principle of the thing? Was any of it worth this? Or was it worth the cost of my family? I was so close to believing I was the selfish old fool she painted me to be, a man tearing his own family apart over a few dollars. Maybe she was right. Maybe I should just let it go, just for the sake of peace. The sheer crushing weight of it all, the exhaustion and the heartbreak, nearly brought me to my knees. As I sat there, lost in that dark place of surrender, my gaze drifted to the mantelpiece. It fell on our wedding photograph. Helen, smiling at me from across the decades, a smile that was always full of a quiet, unshakable strength. And then I heard her voice in my head, as clear as if she were standing right beside me. I remembered a conversation from years ago when I was dealing with a difficult situation at the plant. "Braden," she had said, her hand on my arm, "don't you ever let someone else define who you are. Your dignity is the one thing no one can ever take from you, not unless you hand it to them." Her voice, her memory, was a lighthouse beam cutting through my despair. This fight wasn't about the money. It had never been about the money. It was about dignity. It was about refusing to let my daughter, or anyone, turn me into a man I was not. It was about honoring the life that Helen and I had built on a foundation of truth and hard work. I turned back to my grandson. I slid off the sofa and knelt on the floor in front of him so we were eye to eye. I took his small hands in mine. "Leo," I said, my voice slow and steady, "I love you more than anything in this world, and I love your mommy too. But sometimes grown-ups have problems, very complicated problems." I wouldn't lie to him, and I wouldn't speak ill of his mother in front of him. That was a line I would not cross. "I promise you," I continued, looking directly into his searching eyes, "everything is going to be okay, and no matter what happens, I will always, always be your grandpa." I pulled him into a hug, holding him tight, breathing in the scent of milk and cookies and childhood innocence. Then I let him go and stood up. I walked to the phone, but I didn't call my lawyer to surrender. I called my son-in-law, Isabel's husband, and told him he needed to come and pick up his son. It was the single most painful phone call I have ever had to make. But it was the only choice for a man who had decided that he would not trade his dignity for a false peace. Making that call was one of the loneliest moments of my life, and it made me realize how often we, as men of a certain generation, face our battles in silence. I know a lot of times when we men who've seen more than a few decades, get together, the stories just start to flow. Today, I wanted to open up a little, and I'm also hoping I can hear some of your stories too. You know, sometimes it's just a simple click, a like, a subscribe, or a share. To a lot of people, it might seem like a small passing gesture, but to me and to other quiet voices that need to be heard, every one of those clicks is a ray of light in the darkness. It says, "I see you. I hear you. Your story matters." Now that I've shared some of my story, what I'd like most is to hear from you. In the comments below, I'd be truly honored if you would share a piece of your own story. Was there a time you felt dismissed or that your voice wasn't being heard? Do you have a passion or a hobby that others might have called silly? Or maybe, what was a moment when you found your own strength, even in a quiet way? Please, share if you feel comfortable. I'll read them, and I'll carry them with me, because your stories are important. WAWA Ages wants to build a community where we men, fathers, grandfathers, can share our real experiences, the good and the bad. And hey, if you don't have something heavy to share today, how about a small joy? What made you smile today? If you're watching this on your television, don't hesitate to grab your phone and look up my channel, WAWA Ages. Let's work together to make this a place where no man has to feel like his life, his struggles, and his victories are invisible. Thank you for sitting here with me. It means more than you know.